It's my time. I said it's my time. Listen, it's my time to take back what's mine. I'm snatching it from the devil's hand. 'Cause the God that serves past the bad the plan. Come on, let's take it home now. It's my time, yeah. Hey, it's my time, yeah. That's it. It's my time, yeah.
Hello, everyone. I am Greg DeMyers, Jr., founder and CEO of Gregory Productions, and welcome to another broadcast with Events and Excellence Productions and Promotions. And we are continuing our series on courageous conversations. We have wonderful guests, which they will be introduced here shortly. But I would like you to take the time to share this broadcast, send it to your friends, like, subscribe, comment. We want to know that you're out there. We want to hear from you. Once again, thank you for tuning in to another broadcast. And now I'll turn it over to Kim Milton-Mackey.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for all our guests on this evening, a Sunday evening where everyone is normally resting. But I want to take some time to just give you a little snippet of all of our guests that we have today. It is an honor to be serving on the same platform as them. I want to start off with Angela Waters Austin, CEO, One Love Global, and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Lansing. If you haven't heard of her, you must be living under a rock. She is a mover. She is a shaker. She is a prayer warrior. She is out there. I'm talking about boots on the ground. She does not play games. She loves what she does, and she loves people. She has a plethora of education, helped many people around the community. So if you don't know her, you definitely need to know her. Thank you, Angela, for being a part of something great on tonight. Also, I want to bring to you Commissioner Darrell Slaughter. Darrell Slaughter serves on the Ingham County Board of Commissioners as the commissioner that represents the 3rd District, South Lansing. He currently serves as the vice chair of Ingham County Board of Commissioners and chair of the Ingham County Racial Equity Task Force. And I know Darrell personally, and I'm telling you, if you want something done, put it in his hands and guaranteed to be done. So thank you, Darrell, for being here. Now, also want to take some time to talk about Dr. Elam. He is a pastor first. He's a servant of the people. Honored to have him. He is all over the world. So it is an honor to have him. Dr. Elam received his PhD at Michigan State University. He's a national expert on youth violence and prevention, juvenile justice, and racial and ethnic disproportionality. Dr. Elam is the Michigan Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator for the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And let me tell you, anytime you need anything about statistics, he is your man to call. Last, for our forum guests, I want to talk a little bit about the Carol Seaman, who is the prosecutor for Ingham County. Just a little bit about her. She is a consultant. Also, I'm trying to read her bio here. She has so much, but I'm trying to pick out some of the juicy stuff. As a consultant, a public policy associate, she worked on issues involving race, equity, and disproportionate representative of persons of color in our state, juvenile and child protective services. Again, you'll hear more from her later. She's a mover and shaker herself, and we're honored to have her on tonight. Lastly, I'm sharing the co-moderator with one of my friends, Emma. She is an expert in debating. You do not want to be on the same platform as her if you don't know what you're talking about. She's been involved in the criminal justice system for over 25 years. She is vested in seeing people be the best version of themselves if guided in the right direction. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to my co-moderator at this time. Emma. You're on mute, Emma.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think the best way for us to approach this conversation tonight is to recognize that each one of us have implicit biases that we bring to the table, even in our professional careers. So we have to have open minds when we're dealing with each other and how fair we are with each other based upon those implicit biases that we may have. So I'm asking each person out there tonight to really have an open mind. This is not law enforcement against the citizens or citizens against law enforcement. This is us all coming together for the purposes of finding out what is the best solution for us to all live in harmony together and just be good citizens to one another. I'm going to start off my first question with, does power and privilege function in every interaction of our judicial system? If so, how? Commissioner Slater, are you ready for that question?
Yes. Hey, Emma, and thank you for that great introduction, Kim, and good evening, everyone. Yes, this, in terms of the criminal justice system, I think I think folks are given, especially over the past year. I think people, especially folks who are not aware of some of those inequities in terms of when you are faced with having to be part of the criminal justice system, that those, whether you are of financial means or a Black and brown person, it absolutely has some type of effect on your ability to get a fair outcome in the system. So much so that this was studied in part at the state level, the Michigan Incarceration and Pretrial Commission, which was chaired by our Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist and our Chief Justice Bridget McCormick. And one of the major findings that they found in terms of the folks that who were part of some of the county jails is that while of the folks that they surveyed, while Black folks made up 6% of the counties that they surveyed, but made up around 29% of the jail population. And just doing simple math, we know that does not make sense at all, especially if we're just making up 6% of these of the population of the folks in jail. Some other ways that we know that there's some real problems with our criminal justice system in terms of getting fair representation. And that's what ultimately encouraged our state to pass legislation and to actually create a system so that we have, at a minimum, some quality legal representation with the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. As a result of that, we now each county in the state, in some form or fashion, has to provide quality legal representation for those folks. And a lot of times the folks who end up needing that indigent commission or indigent defense are folks who are not of financial means, because they don't have the funds to pay for some high quality lawyer to make sure that they're not having to take some type of deal that was not ultimately in their best interest. So yes, for a very long time we've known this, but within the last year, this has become more highlighted through, and it's unfortunate it took this, but the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, because look at just our interactions with law enforcement, but I think it's been an opportunity to just kind of peel back the layers of our criminal justice system as a whole. So absolutely, power and privilege plays a role in, I would say, in just about all areas of the justice system or judicial system.
Yeah, I think a lot of that came into place when people were staying incarcerated because they couldn't afford to bond out. So some people who moms and dads hit the funds, right, you were able to pay the bond, versus other people stayed in jails for months on end because they just did not have the financial means in order to get out of jail.
Absolutely.
The next question I have is, I don't know if anyone else wanted to give any feedback. If not, the next question I have is there any data to support discriminatory practices in drivers being pulled over and searches being made by officers? So you're pulled over for one thing, but then all of a sudden that results in a full search of your vehicle. I don't know if Pastor Elam wants to address that, or Carol, or.
Absolutely, Emma, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this wonderful panel. I would say yes, we have anecdotal data as well as qualitative data and quantitative data to support this particular statement. If you didn't know, there is a phenomena that we titled in communities of color, and it's called DWB. Anybody know what that means? Driving while Black. right? And I'm an African-American male, and most African-American men that I've had personal conversations with can tell you a personal story about being pulled over by the police for no apparent reason other than the color of our skin. Probably some of our women of color, but I tend to talk to the guys more often than the women. And especially if you happen to be driving in what we call the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong car. So apparently, getting back to Emma's comment around unconscious bias, as a Black man, I'm supposed to live in a certain place, drive a certain car, and actually be at a certain place at a certain time. And in addition to this anecdotal evidence I hear when we have dialogue, research has also documented these practices, I would say at the federal, state, and local level. One recent report done by the ACLU has documented the practices across this entire country. Also documented it here in Michigan most recently. In our Lansing community, it's been documented. I'm glad that our prosecutor is here to speak about some of these data that we're seeing locally. And some of the studies reveal an alarming disparity in motorist stops and searches. Although African-American drivers were 72% of those pulled over in this one ACLU study, they only represented 14% of drivers in that particular study. 72% of those pulled over, 14% of those who were driving. Here in Lansing, if you read the paper a couple of weeks ago, the Lansing State Journal reported that in the past year, 48 people have been charged with carrying a concealed weapon, stemming from the Michigan State Police pulling over drivers or the Lansing Police engaging in stops for non-public safety reasons. And of the 48 arrests that occurred, 43 were of Black people, 26 were of Black men or boys younger than 25, 8 were under age 18, and at least 36 were made on the south side of Lansing. Right, and even more recent data, Black drivers were stopped 7% more for equipment violations than white drivers, and 10% more often for registration violations than white drivers. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, Emma. Based on our biases, we believe there are some places that some of us should be and shouldn't be, and it's played out in our day-to-day practices, particularly in policing.
I'm not sure if anybody else wants to expand upon the stats that Dr. Elam so graciously gave us.
I can do that now, or I can do it when you ask me the specific question. Either way.
Go for it, Carol.
So I always try to bring everything together. So I've been a lawyer for 40 years. I was an assistant prosecutor from 1983 to 1995. It doesn't take very long, to see that the courtrooms are filled disproportionately with persons of color. I worked mostly in Lansing. And so that was anecdotal evidence that I started seeing back in the 1980s. Fast forward to all the work I did, including with Dr. Elam at Public Policy Associates on race equity issues. When I came to the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office as the elected prosecutor in 2017, there was no question. I believed firmly that institutional bias existed. I'd done the Harvard implicit bias test, and I was already working with Angela Waters Austin with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, and she very graciously began coming to our office for a series of workshops with the staff, not just the prosecutors, but also the other staff, to address our own. And we have a lot of work to do still. We're now working with the Vera Institute of Justice, and we have a work group within our office and is doing some of similar work. And that is to look at our own biases, to look at the history of the criminal legal system and how that's specifically impacted on Black and brown people, specifically Black people, but also many Indigenous people and other persons of color. So specifically regarding data, I've been trying to get data and analyze data for now, ever since I've been in office. The Vera Institute of Justice graciously agreed to work with us in the beginning of 2020. And that is, as Dr. Elam knows, it's very tedious to get data. First of all, you have to actually have data ever inputted to get it. Our case management system does not input data because it's a case-driven system, so it's actually documents, which is great if you want to track an individual through the system, but it doesn't help you with trends. It doesn't work for that. But their Institute of Justice has started putting together data for us finally, and it is just as grim as we thought it would be. Frankly, there's no place in the nation that I've seen that if they don't look at data, that they don't find that there's racial disproportionality in policing, prosecution, courts, probation, pretty much every part of the criminal legal system. So as a result, and now should I segue to the question, or will let you ask me the question, Emma, about the traffic stop policy? Okay, I think she's frozen actually. So is it okay if I go ahead?
Back and forth with the mute.
She's
I'm
muted.
sorry.
There.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been working on some easy, kind of low-hanging fruit issues of race equity since I've been in office. I looked at habitual offenders in 2017 and said, we're not going to charge those as frequently. And then after some of the incidents, well, after George Floyd, last summer, I put in place a resisting and obstructing police policy that requires us to have a heightened scrutiny in how we review warrants involving police citizen involvement that where someone's alleged to resist and obstruct a police officer, because we're finding that the perceptions perhaps of the police officer didn't always match what other perceptions might be. And so we want to take a very close look because we saw some issues that we wanted to take a deeper dive into. As a result of starting to gather some preliminary data and also working with our stakeholders in the community and nationally, I formed a traffic stop policy for non-public safety traffic stops that went into effect a few weeks ago. There's similar policies. Minnesota just did one this week. Other jurisdictions have also done similar ones. And basically, what it says is if you have a traffic stop for a minor non-safety related issue, such as tinted windows, dangling ornaments, tail light out, your license plate light out, or things that we can pretty much all agree that are not public safety issues. We're not talking about speeding, running through red lights, things like that. That if you have a stop for one of those reasons, and then there's a search. We know that very often when someone is stopped and the police might ask for consent to search. And the question always is it really consensual and why are you asking? We have many reasons to provide for a search. We have, you can just search warrant, you can have a valid investigatory stop because you have a reason to believe that person might be involved in a specific crime. They're fleeing the scene of an armed robbery. They just assaulted someone. Legitimate reasons, even for a non-public safety stop, to make that stop. But a lot of stops we're finding, both locally and nationally, are not related to public safety at all. And then the consent that is engendered after that often does not lead to contraband. But when it does, we are having Black and brown people disproportionately charged. So, for example, in Ingham County or in Lansing, let's say, this is LPD's own data, you're 1.7 times more likely to be stopped if you're a Black person than a white person, and 3 times more likely to be searched, even though there's no evidence that supports that it's more like, I'm sorry, my cat is trying to jump into the screen. There's no evidence that supports that Black or brown persons are more likely to have contraband. So what we said is, as a result of these non-public safety stops that can lead to very bad outcomes, as we have seen nationally so often, we don't want that here in Ingham County. And so I have said that if there's a non-public safety stop, and then there's contraband seized, stolen property, a gun, drugs, we're going to engage that same heightened scrutiny to look at the case, make sure we have all the evidence, and we're generally not going to issue those cases when we can't see that there is a valid reason for that stop that is not based on implicit bias or overt bias. So that is relatively new. It's really consistent with what some prosecutors are doing across the United States. Some police departments are also doing it, and we're hoping that will lead to a reduced likelihood of someone being assaulted or even killed as a result of what was initially a very silly, a very inconsequential reason to be stopped by the police.
Yeah, like an air freshener hanging from your your rearview
Or
mirror.
Philando Castile, who, the prosecutor in Ramsey County, Minnesota, who did prosecute the murder of Philando Castile, but did not receive a conviction, just had his policy this week. He had the St. Paul police signed on to his policy, unlike here, where no one has clearly signed on at this point. Some people have not objected to it. But it's something that we know anecdotally, right? And now we're saying, but the data supports it. And was waiting for there to be some kind of dramatic response from law enforcement that because I can only work in my own bailiwick, and where I work is prosecution. So I'm saying, well, then that's where I have to do it. I have to do it where I have the most impact, and that's what charges I issue or what charges we follow up on.
Well, understood, definitely understood. So my next question is, how can policing practices perpetuate racial injustices in the criminal justice system? I think Carol covered a lot of that in terms of just the practices of pulling someone over for implicit biases, but I don't know if someone else wants to expand upon that in terms of how policing practices perpetuate racial injustice that kind of goes throughout the entire criminal justice system.
I would just add to that, when you think about coming into contact with our criminal justice system, it often starts with the police. That's not the case all the time, but in the sense of who are the gatekeepers of our justice system, they are responsible for the front end of the system. And there was a Supreme Court ruling in 1996 that allowed police to use any traffic offense as an excuse to pull a car over, right? And so when you think about who's at risk for being pulled over by the police based on that Supreme Court ruling, I think it does perpetuate racial injustice in the criminal legal system if we are dealing with biases against people of color. In Ingham County specifically, I just looked up the most recent data. If you are African-American male between the ages of 10 and 16, you are 4.5 times more likely to be arrested by the police than a white youth between the ages of 10 and 16. And data tell us, self-report survey data tell us that white youth and African-American youth report themselves that they engage in the same types of illegal behaviors at the same rates. Drug usage, drug distribution, speeding, all those types of things. So that's what you tell us themselves. So why are African-American youth being arrested almost 5 times more often than white youth? It is because many of our practices, not just law enforcement practices, are perpetuated by this notion of what we think is going on within our communities. I've had the privilege of doing police ride-alongs and graduate studies and observed this process firsthand at myself in many cities throughout our state, and would have conversations with law enforcement officers. I've driven through states myself and been pulled over and experienced this. And when I had conversations with law enforcement officers, they would come up with justification to basically deny my rights of equal justice under the law in a pretty fundamental way. And so I would just sort of say that we ought to think about the discretion, the power that we have when we are in positions of authority and have the ability, particularly in a case like driving. I think Prosecutor Seaman can look at it. I think that the code around driving is so large. If anyone tracked any one of us on this call for probably an hour or so, we would all get pulled over for violating something. And so many times it's selective practice, and that selective practice targets people according to our data around race and ethnicity.
And if I can just chime in real quickly about that. So implicit bias is often at work, and if we don't acknowledge it and really shine the light on it, it continues to drive our motivation. And really good people who would not consciously do anything to harm another member of our community can use implicit bias without even realizing they're doing it. And Dr. Elam referred to discretion. police have discretion. Prosecutors have discretion, and it's exercised all the time. They enforce the law, we prosecute the law, but we exercise our considered discretion in how we go about doing that. And we can make those choices. Some people say if there's a law, you have to enforce it. We all know that that is not the way it works. We all know that sometimes officers are parked right there and we drive by at 5 miles over the speed limit and they don't stop us. So everyone exercises discretion. And the question is, how do we exercise the discretion in a way that is fair, just, and doesn't disproportionately impact certain parts of our community?
May I add something? I just wanted to just briefly say, I want to give Prosecutor Seaman kudos for, having some courage to put this policy out. I know she received some blowback. Obviously, I think there has not been enough space in terms of nuance, in terms of this conversation. I know folks are absolutely concerned. We all are. I think everybody on this call is concerned about the recent rise in gun violence in our part, particularly in the city of Lansing. But the issue that, and I don't mean to speak for you, Prosecutor Seaman, but that what you're trying to get at is this, this bias that exists prior to, even before the recent rise in gun violence happening in the city of Lansing. I think what has been lost is some of the nuance in terms of your policy, in terms of addressing. We can continue to make sure people are safe and address gun violence while also addressing the issue that has been long-standing before this summer, this rise in gun violence this summer. We can do both. We can walk and chew gum, but I think what has happened in the conversations in the public, some of that nuance has been lost. So I just wanted to chime in and add that. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that we're all concerned about public safety, so we don't want to put that on a back burner. However, it's how do we get to justice for everyone equally across the board while protecting the public? Because if you have implicit biases and you choose to arrest this person with a gun, but you choose to ignore this person with a gun, the danger is still there. So we have to figure out, how do we enforce justice, but do it for everybody? Like Pastor Elam said, you have two 16-year-olds who make a mistake. You can ruin one 16-year-old's life by putting him through the system and introducing him to a world that he had no knowledge of. While the other one, you take him home, you have a conversation with his parents, and that juvenile goes in a different direction. So we have to be conscious of the choices that we're making, because we can ruin someone's life because of our implicit biases. The next question that I'm going to move into is, how were warrants approved in the past, and how is it different now for Ingham County? This question is directed at Carol.
Oh, I'll be very quick because I really want to hear from Angela Waters Austin, because she has such insight into how the whole over legal system works. So as I mentioned, we have heightened scrutiny. We always have discretion. We have to obviously find that there is a law that supports charging in a specific instance, but then we also have to look at the facts and all the circumstances. We've always had discretion to refer people to diversion for certain situations, or decide between a felony and misdemeanor charge. But what we're doing now is to look more closely at all the facts of certain kinds of situations, like these non-public safety traffic stops, felony firearm, resisting and obstructing. And the other thing we're going to be doing as we're working with Vera is looking more closely at how some of our biases about how we look at prior criminal records. If you are a Black or brown person, you're more likely to have a criminal record based on your increased contact with the system, which means you may be foreclosed from some of the remedies that we have, such as our diversion program or Home's Youthful Trainee Act. So we have to now look more deeply and say, how are some of those things that seem very logical on their face, like you have a prior record, we're not going to give you this option for another chance, bite of the apple. When is that not fair? So those are the kinds of things that we're still exploring, where there's sometimes baby steps, and we have to keep going back and looking and seeing what are the results of what we've done. Do we have the results we intended or not? And we don't always, so we have to keep looking at that.
No, definitely understood in terms of reviewing it. I don't know, Angela, do you want to expand upon that?
Thank you for that welcome and transition. And just to lift up a few points, because one is having access to data. Who actually has the data? How is that data interpreted? Because I want to point out that Lansing Police Department has conducted studies on traffic stops for a good decade, if not more. And that data, if you look at the numbers, the disproportionality is there. In the conclusion that has been drawn, though, year after year after year, is that there is no bias, that it is not racially motivated. So the DWB that Pastor Elam pointed out has been denied. And there has been data and studies put in front of the community year after year to justify the actions of police and to deny that there is actually a racial bias in those stops, even though the numbers say one thing. So I just want to point out that data can be interpreted and used very differently, which is why it is so important to really examine the story behind the data, because the same data that we're talking about to talk about racial inequity could be easily used by others to make a case for criminality of Black people. So that's why it is really important for us to dig deeper into what is actually motivating the stops, what's motivating the arrests. And what is really important is the point that there is no greater likelihood of contraband for Black people than there is for white people. So what motivates and what justifies stopping and searching and arresting and charging more frequently, more likely, Black folks? And so this is always such a good time for history. Carol pointed out that we came together in this truth, racial healing, and transformation work. And part of the truth is understanding the history of how we got where we are. And one of, I think, a tremendous accomplishment was having our former police chief now, Chief Yankowski. I'm just thinking now, we're on our fifth prosecutor since I've been doing racial equity, fifth police chief since we've been doing this racial equity work in the community. And it was a major milestone for Chief Yankowski to begin to educate his team, to educate himself, to understand the history and the origins of policing as slave patrols. So it's not just the policy, it is the culture, a culture that is anti-Black, that criminalizes Blackness, that continues to show up centuries later. So it is not just implicit bias, it is a very explicit anti-Black bias that says these people that look this certain way are more likely to commit crimes, even though the data does not support it. So if the data doesn't support it, what is actually driving the practice? What is driving the policy? And how do we continue to perpetuate those practices? And we can't address it. Carol can introduce policies. We can study the data. But as long as we have police associations that ensure that police have the latitude to take these actions and to violate citizens' rights, it is going to become increasingly more likely that prosecutors are going to be at odds with law enforcement. So it is really important for us as a community to really understand how significant Carol's work and the work of other progressive prosecutors is around the country, and being able to really understand what's happening in the law enforcement, on the law enforcement side, as well as on the court side. So prosecutors have a great deal of power, and I'm just delighted to be able to work with Carol and her office and Vera Institute on this series on the power of prosecutors, because we really have to understand how does prosecution work in our community, because it doesn't look like law and order. You know, we get a steady diet of policing and what law and order means because we're indoctrinated. And we're all indoctrinated into an idea of policing as heroes and saviors, but we don't actually get the truth of the origins and the history, and I mean recent history, and how police have been used to disrupt labor movements, how police have been used most recently to disrupt protest against police brutality and police homicide. And understanding, so even in the case of our homeless community, our homeless neighbors, who actually enforces and makes and actually is involved in that. So if you are struggling to pay your rent and you get an eviction notice, who actually is responsible for enforcing that? So law enforcement shows up in our lives in so many ways that really impact Black people, brown people, immigrants, our homeless population. So the more vulnerable a person is, the more likely they are to be to find themselves in these interactions with law enforcement, with less likelihood that there's going to be strong advocates, strong legal defense. And so one of the things that's really important is for us to understand that it's us as a community that keep us safe, and how important it is for us to really understand what that data means so that it's not actually used to increase police budgets, to actually create more harm.
Now my question becomes, how do we bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement? Because law enforcement is always going to be here. And then bridge the gap between law enforcement and the prosecutor's office so that we can have those bridges that come, because I 100% agree. I know the history behind policing. I know that it was a transition for free labor and another way to, pretty much enslave you. So just getting to the point. And so I already know the hard labor, and then it kind of gave you the criminal history so that you couldn't get employment and kind of things could be used against you. Now, where we're at now is we've done so many movements within a community, and we don't necessarily want the prosecutor's office at odds with law enforcement, even though her job is to do her part in this chain that's created. So how do we bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement first? Because that's where most of our problems are coming from. And then the cases to go to the prosecutor's office, it looks like Carol's trying to make changes, but we have changes all over the country that need to happen. She's doing her part. So I don't know if anybody wants to answer.
Can I weigh in from the prosecutor perspective? Because first of all, I want to say that I don't see I'm not an abolished police person at all. I do believe, not everyone on the screen might agree with me, but I do not believe that I do believe we should substantially take a deep look at what policing practices are. And I'll just promote something on September 20th at 7 p.m. There's going to be a show called Racially Charged, and I'm on the panel. It's going to be hosted by One Love Global. It's going to be a national endeavor. And it's a 35-minute documentary about the 80% of crimes charged in the U.S. that are misdemeanors and how those significantly racially disproportionately impact minorities. I'm sorry, that's not a word to you. Black and brown persons and fatally often. But so I work with the police. I always will work with the police. And I think there are many, many individuals who are very interested in practices. I meet individually with leaders in law enforcement weekly. So I don't want it to look like, because there are some very vocal voices, that means that there are not daily efforts between my staff, myself, and local law enforcement, and also law enforcement on different levels. That I review as I can materials from the International Chiefs of Police or PERF. I can't recall what that stands for right now. But in other words, that I feel it's my obligation to understand from the law enforcement side too, because I do believe that most people are really trying to protect and serve. There are truly some evil people in every profession, but that most people think they're doing the right thing when we're not. And I know, because in 40 years of being a lawyer, I sometimes did what, looking back, I realized was result in harm to someone. Not because I meant to, not because I wasn't doing the right thing, but because we've learned better practices. And that's all I want to do, is be there for that conversation, even though they're very uncomfortable conversations sometimes, to say, what are we learning that's going to help us try something new? How do we look at that to see if it's working? And how do we do this together, even if we're not all coming from the same perspective?
Absolutely. It's how do we come to fairness together? Because right now, this country is on life support in terms of us trying, and Black and brown people are the ones on the ventilator. So how do we come together in order for everyone to just be administered the same justice? The next question that I have is, do you think that in general across this country that police departments believe that they are being watched, scrutinized due to cell phones and body cameras? Because body cameras can also protect the police, because if you're doing what you need to do, that is your saving grace, to show you've done everything by the book. So do you believe that that they, instead of seeing it as a positive, to show, yes, that stop was proper, I did what I was supposed to do, this person did not follow the rules, it was a legitimate arrest? Do you think they see it as something positive, or do they see it as them being scrutinized by the general public to hold them accountable?
I think that question was geared for me, and I'm sorry, I have a cat here who's trying to play fetch with me. And I just want to answer this with measure. And so PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, like I've had an opportunity to be in a room in PERF in DC with law enforcement leadership from across the country, and with community folks, with chiefs and sheriffs. And what I heard consistently, and it didn't really matter the size of the community, whether it was urban or rural, is that police and law enforcement leadership really have difficulties with making the kind of transformations that they know will result in less biased policing. And they're under a great deal of pressure because there are labor contracts. I'm going to call them association contracts, because unions and labor and police associations are really not the same animal. So I want to make a distinction. It's really important to make a distinction between labor unions and police associations, but those police associations have a great deal of power and really present a challenge for the chiefs and the sheriffs who actually want to have greater disciplinary control, that actually want to, like they know, like they could tell you who are the officers who have the track records of violating conduct, who have been abusive, who have been deceptive in their reporting. The problem is that they are protected. They are protected by contracts that make it really difficult to actually get those people out of the force. And so we keep talking about, it's the good police officers that can transform the system, without really understanding that the system is designed to correct itself and to protect itself. And so body cams are only as good as that information being accessible to the public, so that the public can actually use that information. There would be no need for people to actually get on video cameras if body cameras were actually used consistently. And every department doesn't have body cams. And I also say about body cams is that it actually adds money to the police budget. And unlike Carol, I am an abolitionist. And so I am, very interested in all of the ways that we need to invest in the root causes of violence in our community. And so we look to police to solve all kinds of problems that they were never designed to solve. So you're right, we actually do need public safety. And so I'm going to call it a community safety agency. So we do need to actually look at ways that we can make sure that communities are safe, but we also need to look at what actually makes communities safe. And there is very little data to support a correlation between increasing police budgets and increasing police and actually reducing violent crime.
Now, I'm going to segment into that because I think what happened across America when people saw defund the police signs across America, they got confused. They started believing that means we're going to get rid of the police forces. That means we're not going to have officers, when defund the police was really meant to deal with issues that police officers aren't equipped to deal with, like mental health, needing social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, those type of individuals in the community, because law enforcement, even throughout my 25-year career, until recently, I was never taught how to deal with the mental health community. So I'm going to segment right over to Kim, who's going to address some of those issues of why that funding needs to be put in other places. It actually helps law enforcement in the end, and it helps the community as well. And that's one of the bridges that kind of closes that gap that I was talking about earlier. So Kim, I'm going to move it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. A lot of times change is very difficult, and that's why the topic is change is necessary but controversial. A lot of times when these changes are put in place, you're always going to have someone say, we've done it this way for years. Why are we changing? We're changing because it didn't work. It's not working. So if you're on the front of change, then you're not going to be as popular as someone who wants to get in and fit and continue the way that things have gone. So thank you for that segment. I knew that when you talk about data and you talk about things like this is what we want to continue to spread with the community. Is about data, not about he say, she say. These things are on papers. I always say data don't lie. Data do not lie. And so tonight, the data that we've talked about today, I'm hoping that we can continue to connect with some of the panelists to see what we can do to assist them in broadening what we need to do to make it better for Black and brown people. Now, because we've took so much time on this, we're not going to be able to get through all of this, but there are a couple questions because I want to stay true to the time, and we'll come back because we know a lot of people, they tap out. So we definitely want to stay within our time limit. So Angela, we're going to keep this momentum going. How can we support mental health counseling and restorative healing circles designed to support minorities, Black and brown, who are processing racial trauma?
Thank you for making that point, because the transformation has to happen and we can't wait. We can't wait for systems and policies to change for us to be able to heal. The truth is, the reality is that racial violence happens every day. And that means that we actually need to invest more in the kind of supports in our community, whether it's healing circles, whether it's therapy, whether it's support groups. For some people, it's arts and culture. For some people, it's nature, being able to be in a natural environment. And so as a community, it's really about people naming what healing looks like for them. I know what healing looks like for me. And for me, it's why I do racial equity work. The ability to get up every day and to call a thing and to actually be able to work on the solutions. For me, that's healing. For somebody else, that would be extremely draining, triggering, and probably traumatizing. But it is really important for us to understand that we actually do need to prioritize that type of healing community and understand that if we're investing 50% and more of our budgets to policing, that's less money that actually can go into communities for healing. So if we look at just Lansing's budget alone, and we're spending close to $50 million on policing, and we're investing $1 million max in actual community resources and human services supports. So that balance, that's why defunding is such an important issue. And so I'll also share that as the director of operations and policy for BLM Grassroots, which is our global network of chapters, We're looking at this at the global scale. Anti-Blackness is global. Police misconduct and police brutality is global. And so we have to look at capitalism. We have to look at the way that systems are designed to really perpetuate poverty. And so when we say that the system is not working, that's actually something that we have to just deal with the reality and accept that the system is working exactly as it was designed to. It's producing the desired results. I think what we're saying is that we are no longer going to accept those results as the norm, and that we are actually going to demand that resources that our tax dollars feed into actually need to invest in the communities and what people actually need. So there are organizations that do healing, that do mental health support. They're not all institutional. Some of them are very grassroots. And I would say to really reach out into the community. And one of the things that we're doing is actually building a racial healing network, so people actually know the resources that are available to them across the state of Michigan. So there's more to come on that.
Wow. Thank you, Angela. Because I want our listeners to know that there are people that are actually working on that piece, that counseling piece, a place to go to where individuals can actually get the help that they need, as opposed to calling the police to get all these other interactions. Dr. Elam, the experience of justice is emotionally draining in a country that does not value Black life. Are we any closer to resolving racial disparities?
That's a tough question. And so we'll probably need a whole nother segment just to dive into that. But I'll try my best to respond and share with you why it's complex to me. I think a lot of times we use the term justice or racism or equity or disparity, but I think when you try to unpack it, you begin to quickly realize that we have to deal with this at multiple levels, right? And by multiple levels, I mean all the way from how I think about it as a person, to how I interact with other people, to the institutions that we work in, the systems that we've developed, the structures, and how we've been told we can operate within society, and then the policies that we develop at all levels to undergird all of that. And that's pretty complex. And from my observation as a researcher, I think most of our efforts tend to focus at the individual level. We like blaming people, and we don't acknowledge the histories and the context and the systems and the structures in which we all operate within, and they contribute to a lot of the phenomena and outcomes that we actually see on a day-to-day basis in our communities. How we show up and engage one another, and many of the proponents that are doing this work now talk about dialogue. Angela just talked a little bit about it, storytelling and training and professional development. And I think that's a critical part of our work. And to your question, Kim, I think there's a lot of progress in that space. People are having dialogues and conversations in ways that we haven't in the past. So in a sense, we are making some progress in how probably to respect one another, but I don't think it's authentic progress. I think if we're honest, I'll show up at work and talk to you as a colleague, and in my head, I still think I'm better than you, or I might still suffer from internalized oppression and think I'm less than you, depending on who I am because of how I've been socialized in America. And I still believe fundamentally that we have hierarchy around race and ethnicity. It's built in, it's baked in, it's hard to overcome. So if I'm treating you better and talking to you better, is that really progress? If I really know internally I don't feel that way. And to add to that, if we've not done our work at the systemic and structural level and dealt with these policies, who cares if you talk to me better, if at the end of the day I'm still being discriminated against, right? And I think when I talk to youth in our community, they can see that. We can act like this country is moving in the right direction, but they're not fooled, and they want authentic progress. that really acts. And I'm glad that our prosecutors here and our commissioners here, they know. I mean, the community wants real, authentic, fair and equitable treatment, and it's tough. I'm not sort of saying it's easy to do that, because public policy is a tough space to work in, and you've got to be really experienced and shrewd and wise to get something done in that space. But we have to get it done, right? That's why people elect us to do that work. So yes and no, and I'll comment more when you give me the opportunity to do so.
I tell you what, that internalized thing is something else, because if we haven't learned anything about being American, we certainly know how to fake it until we make it. And so a lot of times we are walking around here with these fake faces and things like that. And sometimes when people call us to the carpet, we're like, no, Mom, me, yes, you know. And so that's what I like to get down these courageous conversations, is just to be you, talk, no hers bar, because we want to help this next generation. If we don't even help this one, at least the next one know, all the things that have been done to help them live a better life. Okay, Commissioner Slaughter, should we continue having conversations about social justice and race and unity discussions? I mean,
yeah, Kim, I think this is probably one of the most obvious question, and one of the obvious answers. The question, I think, or the answer is overwhelmingly yes. Again, unfortunately, it took the deaths of Black people, black men and women having to die, and for folks to really realize, yeah, there are some real issues. For example, in the criminal justice system, and what it has done, especially in this pandemic, it has opened up conversations around all aspects of government and society. It's created a space for us to actually feel like we don't have to sugarcoat or kind of dance around some of these more difficult conversations around how all of our different systems are working in society. And the great thing is that people don't have to kind of scale back their ask, but we can ask wholeheartedly, what do we need to actually really address these issues, these inequities that have existed. We've all known these issues existed for decades and decades. Growing up, my mom and aunts talked about, my aunt, for example, was one of the first Black engineers that worked at Detroit Edison. She told me, growing up, I always used to hear about the stories about having to downplay or try to assimilate into working for that company, and just the mental stress and the toll that played on her, just in order for her to be able to provide for my cousins. And that is, that should be the path. We should be moving forward. We should not have to do that anymore. And these are tough conversations. People are comfortable, and some of that comfortability is not just in terms of folks who are white, but even some Black folks or brown folks who have been operating these different systems, and they've learned that system and are comfortable in how it's been working. But now we're all in this process of re-examining how can we best serve all people, but particularly Black folks who have experienced a lot of the inequities in terms of how these systems have been working, our healthcare system, how just general functions of government. One of the things as a commissioner, I've only been a commissioner coming up on 3 years, and I love my county employees. They do some amazing work. There's some awesome people, but the process of starting to integrate conversations around race, and Kim, you have been an amazing part. You are a trailblazer and one of the founding folks at the county back when it wasn't as popular to talk about some of this stuff. You've been talking about this stuff for decades and for forever. But now it's a bit more. There's a space to actually really have these conversations about what does it mean for example, for a governmental entity or these different institutions to actually really address the needs of their black folks the constituencies or folks that they provide services to. What does it mean to actually make sure that we're actually meeting their needs and doing it on their terms and not having to dance around or move around how they actually need to be addressed. So I think overwhelmingly we need to continue having these conversations, having these tough conversations, and be courageous about them. And we need groups like Angela's group to and other folks to continue to put pressure on these institutions to have these conversations. So Absolutely. That's just a no-brainer question for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Slaughter. Well, thank you for the work. I'm going to get prosecutor in here because I know she has to try to slim off here, but I definitely want to hear this from her. How can we become more aware of our own unconscious prejudice and make changes? Like for the ones that are watching, like yourself as a testimony, prosecutor, kind of tell us how, how are you dealing with these things personally? Like some of the things, the convictions, like who's watching, how can we become aware and, kind of make some changes?
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry, I do have to leave to pick up a friend at the Michigan Flyer. So first of all, it's a long journey. You have to be willing to plunge into despair daily, and then crawl back out, which I do almost every day. I grew up in Lansing. I went to Patton Gillen Eastern High School. I marched in one of the first civil rights parades here. So I've sort of had a little different perspective than maybe some people in my position typically have. But with that said, I can't say that every time I think I'm kind of woke, something happens and I learn that I'm really not, right? But you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to, accept that you may have done harm inadvertently. I look back at my work in the child welfare system, for example, and the fact that just like the criminal legal system, we have so many children in foster care, so many families disrupted that clearly are based on their status as an Indigenous person or a Black or brown person. And it's horrifying to me that I've been a part of that, not because I was a bad person and didn't work really, really hard to do the right thing. So I think that is what I have to remind myself. Don't ever become smug, because as soon as you do, you get hit down, and you should. But you just keep coming back and to say, you know what? I'm going to have the conversation. Dave Hollister, a former mayor of Lansing, told me in 2016, he was on my advisory committee for my first campaign. And we talked about tenaciousness and civility and the willingness to come back to the table and continue to have the conversation when we're in a culture right now where it's very easy just to take a position, lock onto that position, and then refuse to talk to anybody who doesn't share that position. We don't get a whole lot done that way. So like Commissioner Slaughter said, I think we're all saying the same thing. And, that we have to keep coming back to the table. We have to be willing to listen to people who have a different perspective than our own. We have to be willing to be wrong. We have to be willing to be kind and generous to ourselves and to others as we're going through a really difficult process.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. Thank you for being on, and thank you for being open and honest, because I believe that, testimonies help people. And I think it's not too late for us to get involved in some of these things that are happening through the various organizations who are represented here on tonight. We are going to just move to segment 5 because we went over a little bit. So I'm going to start off a question, then we'll give it back to Emma. She's going to ask a question, and this is to anybody on the panel. What role do parents have in making the next generation more inclusive than their own? Anybody can answer that.
But you just said it. The next generation is here already. If we're not doing it right now, we're gonna miss it.
Yep.
And what I mean, so like Dr. Elam, I'm like, and I love the histories and the connections that I have with folks on this call. It's just like, so they're like, we go back. All of us all go back in different ways. And both Commissioner Slaughter and Pastor Dr. Elam, I'm like, the titles and the positions have changed over the years. It takes longer to say your names now, but that's a great thing. But the connection to youth, the one thing that we have in common is our commitment to young people and actually seeing them as leaders right now and their lived experience. You have to understand that young people are experiencing the uprising just like we are, but in a very visceral way. And the threats to their lives, the violence that's happening to their communities is a reality in a way that we are more distant from. So that's where the investments actually need to happen. When young people say that they have a need, that this is what it needs to look like, this is what healing looks like for me, these are my fears, these are my concerns. As adults, we owe it to them as allies to actually move accordingly and to equip them with the tools and the resources the gift of our wisdom, but also understanding that our wisdom is not their reality, and that they experience this world in social media, in the threats of violence, what it's like to be in their classrooms, what it's like for them to interact with police in ways that, as adults, we have far more privilege, far more power, and to understand what it's like to be a young person. And so young people have a better understanding, I think, that we're not post-racial. And so as much as we want to talk about building bridges, how many of us would actually take our children by the hand and lead them across the bridge knowing that there was a violent threat on the other side? So that bridge has to look like safety. It has to look like freedom. And so what's actually happening on the other side of the bridge is actually, I think, where we really need to be supporting our young people, rather than kind of hastily trying to like create a false sense of unity and a false sense of peace. So that inclusivity, that understanding of what racial equity looks like has to be defined on their terms. And we have to be building the systems that they actually desire, because they're the ones that are going to hold them when we're not here anymore.
Oh, I completely agree with you. In order to build a bridge, you have to feel safe going across the bridge. So we kind of got to show them what's on the other side of the bridge. And that is by having conversations like this, by demanding the change occurs within our community so that the next generation does have a sense of safety where they can speak up. Now I'm going to segment into the next question. How can our community be more confident in intervening when they witness disrespect, harassment of a person of color? This speaks to George Floyd. A courageous young lady pulled out her phone and she recorded it. And the only reason the officer likely was prosecuted was because of that recording. Now, the people who witnessed his murder did not know what to do. They did not feel that bridge, that safety to say, hey, get off of him, even though they knew what was occurring was not right. So what do we need to do as a community where we feel safe enough to say, when you see an injustice that's occurring, even amongst law enforcement themselves, because you are a citizen and they are working for you, how do we bridge that gap in a sense of giving them the courage to move forward in terms of, if I call the police is who I'm dealing with. If I pull out my phone, I'm archiving someone's death pretty much. So what do we need to teach the next generation to do in situations where they see a crime occurring right in front of them? Anyone?
I'll be very brief. In my email signature, I use Dr. Martin Luther King's quote, and the first sentence is, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But the next sentence is really what I spend a lot of time thinking about. And I think we live in this society and have a worldview where we believe we're sort of separate, that we live on islands. And I just don't believe that. He says we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And I believe that true. I mean, this pandemic we're living in is a testament to that if we see injustice and believe at some point it's going to come to my household, I should be about my business and trying to root it out. And most Americans who've lived in this society have experienced some type of injustice. You might be privileged in some sense to not have had it come to your household, but most folks I've talked to, that's not their experience. And I think if we wake up believing that it is the right thing to do, it is not just my child or my household, but it is our community. We might see this thing a bit differently. And I would say that's what challenges me to do this work, Emma, that if someone didn't help me, I wouldn't be here. And I believe I can help someone else because of the work that we actually do. And so it's not political for me. It's not about money. It's about a belief. it is how I see the world and what I want to commit my time to while I have the opportunity.
I think for myself, I've always lived under the belief that you are truly your brother and sister's keeper. It does not matter what their color, their gender, none of that matters. If you believe every day when you wake up in the morning that you are each other's keeper and you're going to hold each other accountable and you're going to hold yourself accountable and you're going to do right by the next person, irregardless, it comes down to this is right, this is wrong. And if you live by that philosophy instead of this is blue, this is brown, this is black, you live by the philosophy that I'm my brother's keeper and you're doing my brother or sister wrong, we move in the right direction. But if you believe you're only yourself and your family's keeper or your community's keeper, that's where the problems lie. You have division from the start. And as soon as you have division, there's a separation of how you're going to view me, how you're going to view society, even economics. If a person believes they make more money than this person, so they're better than that person, they're going to treat them accordingly. So I agree with the pastor's statement. You have to go into it believing that there is enough good in the world that we can bring it all together, but we have to work hard at it and hold each other accountable.
Emma, can I add something just very quickly? I just wanted to say something which is going to kind of sound ironic coming from somebody who's a legislator, but I think the types of things that Dr. Ewan was talking about is not something that we could pass some type of law or ordinance or whatever to really solve. I think it does come down to the community's moral code and just generally how we view each other. And that is something deeper than any type of policy that I could pass or our state representatives or senators or mayors or anybody else could pass. It really comes down to this community's values. And I do believe we have some amazing people that live in this community. And I think, in this sort of situation, I think folks would absolutely support if there's a wrongdoing captured on like a cell phone video, that folks would rally and absolutely address this as it should be. And so again, we can pass a million laws and ordinances, but I think it really comes down to the community's actual moral character. And I do think we have some good folks with great moral character in this community that we live in.
I agree. I want to believe that we have more good than bad in a community. And so, irregardless of race, it comes down to when I'm a good person, and even though, like I said, we all have implicit biases, and we have to recognize that. But when I strive to be a better person, I am going to have the tough conversations and not be irritated because someone says, I'm black and brown and I've been done wrong. If I've done you wrong, I want to know that I've done you wrong. But a person who does not want to change may take more offense to that statement versus people who do want to change within a community and want more unity. They will help us all together build that bridge so that the next generation will feel safe crossing it. And right now, we need more people on the line to build that bridge and to make sure that when they cross, they're safe to get to the other side. And like I said before, I believe that this country is on life support. We even though a person is still alive doesn't mean that they're not half dead. So you have to recognize the fact that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And you have to have conversations and you have to promote change and you have to be willing to put yourself out there despite what your positions of power are to say this is wrong.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. As we wind down, we got about 2 more minutes. But before we get done, I think it's important to know the platforms that we use to hear our voices as opposed to the various voices and the way someone else looks at things and see things. That's been part of the issue. Especially when you sit in a room and you hear things said and you're like, Where does this stuff come from? So, having a seat at the table now is something that I've never, seen doing this work. And not only having a seat, but not trying to silence you. That's really important because it came to a point to where you got a seat, but then you were silenced. And so now part of the platforms and change is I have a seat at the table and I am going to talk while I'm at the table and I am going to try to make change and I'm not going anywhere. And everybody on this forum is not going anywhere until the changes that we need to be done are done. So tonight's forum, we're not going anywhere. And before we leave, I want each panelist to leave a message of hope for all of our listeners out there who's going through all these various things, and just tell us anything that's coming up that we should know about. All right, I'm going to start with you, Commissioner Slaughter, then Angela, then Dr. Elam, and then we'll end with Emma.
Thank you, Kim. I want to say thank you, Kim, Emma, Greg, for putting this type of dialogue. We absolutely need to have more dialogues, to talk about these issues and create spaces that really have honest conversations about how we are addressing like racial equity issues, racial justice issues in our different capacities. I feel, I started off, Angela had said that we've known each other for a number of years. I actually started off when I first met her, kind of a youth, and I've been kind of doing this work for a number of years in various capacities. But what I would say is that this work is not, it's not simple, it's not quick, it's definitely not quick, but is that this work is continuing, it's ongoing, and this is just a new iteration, but please keep the hope that there's some good folks who are always going to be working on these issues, at different capacities. At Ingham County, I'm trying to do my best along with you, Kim, and to make sure that these issues do not fade away, and that we address these issues in an honest, transparent way, that we can actually start to make changes in our own realm and where we function, but even broader than that. And so I just think I'm honored to be part of this conversation, and really to look forward to more opportunities to talk about these types of issues, to talk about the work that we're doing. And I'm a glass half full type person, so I'm optimistic about the changes that are going to come from this period of time that there's a lot of stress and a lot of discomfort right now. I think there's going to be some really good things that are going to come out of this period of time. So I just want to say thank you.
Angela?
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Dr. Elam and Commissioner Slaughter, and to the team that's actually holding the tech behind the scenes. Thank you. And Carol, who had to leave previously. Hope is in policy that's actually happening right now. So if you haven't heard about the Breathe Act, just Google breatheact.org and look at what the Breathe Act, this beautiful dream of what civil rights legislation of our times can look like, and that it has already inspired real policy. I had the pleasure of being on a webinar with Representative Cori Bush when she introduced the People's Response Act, which is about building this community safety agency and ensuring that communities have the resources for mental health and education and all of the things that we really need. I'm also excited about Representative Barbara Lee introducing the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission, which is actually taking the work that we've been doing here in our local community and actually creating a federal commission with resources to support local work that's happening all across the country. And our community is actually one of the vanguards in what this actually looks like. So really excited. And that to me is hopeful to see this movement at the local, the state, and at the federal level in spite of the opposition. And that there are people who are really determined to bring not just progressive policy, but actual radical policy that actually gets at the root to dismantle and to rebuild systems that actually work for us. Oh, and Wednesday, part 4 of the, or is it part 5 of the Power of Prosecutors series. So you can follow it on Black Lives Matter Michigan, One Love Global, and join us. Lansing People's Assembly is our place for co-governance, where we're actually building a Lansing Breathe Act together.
I do, Commissioner Slaughter and Angela, glad to be on the panel with the two of you and Prosecutor Seaman and everyone for creating this forum. Thank you. I would say for those who are people of faith, pray more, definitely love more. I believe God has called us to play an important role to address many of the issues that we are having dialogue around. And I think it's our responsibility to be in the earth and do something about it. Stop believing that the solutions are not in our community. I think we should talk to those who are most impacted. They know what they need. I had the privilege to talk with the youth, with a young youth group. I know Angela does it all the time, but this was specifically around gun violence and carrying guns, and sat down and had food with them for about an hour and a half and listened to their stories. What might seem to be illegal to us or violation of the law to us made a lot of sense to me. They're basically trying to cope with growing up in a community that's not safe. They don't have father figures. They don't have families. They don't have resources. And so they're doing their best. And at the end of the conversation, all we talked about was, what do you need to get out of this lifestyle? And sometimes we make things harder than they need to be. They said, we just want a job in a safe community. And for those of us who have been caught up in this justice system, can you get someone to modify our court orders that would allow me to move to a safe community? They didn't want their charges changed, anything. They just want a job and they want to live in a safe community. And if we can't provide that for our youth, shame on us. Many of the solutions to address these underlying causes of crime have nothing to do with police. And they have everything to do with us focusing on the health and well-being of our community. So if we prioritize that, look at the research evidence, and talk to those who are most impacted by violence, by crime, I have no doubt that we will find the solutions that we need in our community.
Emma, do you have any last words?
I like to conclude by saying the moment that you let society convince you that you don't matter or that you don't have a voice is the moment that you lose your voice. So you have to say, I do matter. I do have a future. My children have a future, and my legacy has a future. So the decisions that you allow to be made for you, instead of you pretty much being a part of change, because I think what we have to stop doing is waiting for everyone else to change policies and procedures and things for us and be a part of that change. So we have to encourage the next generation to use their voice, and more in this generation that we can encourage to use their voice, the better the next generation will be. But I think what happens is we've almost taught them to a certain degree to be silent and to just not speak. Well, some of us have. I have not taught my children that. So I want the next generation to know you do have a voice. You do have a place in society. You were born for a reason. And so hold your place in society, take your seat at the table, keep talking until you can't talk anymore, but don't let society dictate to you, like they have for so many generations, what your value is.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, Commissioner Slaughter. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dr. Elam. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Carol. We are not done talking, and I will get you all back when we got some more time to dive into some other issues. But again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I want you all, if you can and will, on September the 30th, we'll be back here. We're going to be highlighting melanated millennials who are branching out in business and branching out, inspiring others in the kingdom, entrepreneurship, and just listening to them. Some of these, have all kind of backgrounds, but they still made it through. And I believe tonight we are going to share the message of hope, the message of a heart change. And so thank you again all for being on tonight. But before we leave, if we can have, it's an honor to have Pastor Elam to be on here. So I'm going to have him dismiss us tonight in prayer.
Be my privilege. Father God, we thank you for this gathering. Oh God, I thank you for the opportunity to share. Oh God, we thank you for the leadership, the excellence that is presented here. Oh God, I pray that there will be great success in Kim's ministry here to this community. Oh God, I thank God for Elder Greg DeMyers, oh God, for the platform that you've given him to share this message in the community. Oh God, I even thank you for Emma, who moderated and facilitated, for using her voice. Oh God, Lord, we pray for our elected official, Commissioner Slaughter and Prosecutor Seaman. Oh God, pray that you give them wisdom. Speak to them, oh God, give them what to do, when to do it, to be a mouthpiece for justice in this community. Most of all, we pray for Sister Angela, oh God, as she does her work, the people's work, oh God, here in this community nationally, oh God. We pray that you would cover her, protect her, open up doors, give her favor, oh God. And Lord, we pray for this community, oh God, that your hand would be upon it, oh God, that you would protect us, oh God, that you would give us just leaders, oh God, that you would bring this community together in love, oh God. Lord, we pray for all of our elected officials who you've raised up and entrusted to lead this community, oh God. And Lord, we pray for every mother that's lost a child, oh God. Keep them, oh God. Give them comfort, oh God, when they need it, oh God. Lord, we pray for this generation and now generation. Raise up leaders. Give them what they need, oh God. Let them speak up and ask and demand that they be provided what they need to thrive, not just exist, oh God, but to thrive and become the next generation of leaders. We thank you, we praise you, we give you glory, honor, and praise. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.